The jet bridge was freezing, but the glares from the airline staff were even colder. They had just dragged a young black woman out of seat 1A, clutching nothing but a battered leather duffel bag. A wealthy, smirking businessman had complained about her presence in first class, and the gate agents had eagerly bowed to his prejudice, citing a ticketing error. The supervisor threatened her with arrest, police officers were marching down the aisle, and passengers had their phones out to record her humiliation. What the arrogant staff didn't realize, however, was that the woman they were publicly degrading didn't just hold a valid first-class ticket. She held the deed to the entire airline. The sprawling expanse of JFK International Airport's Terminal 4 was a symphony of rolling luggage, frantic announcements, and the low hum of thousands of people in transit. For Vivienne Carmichael, the chaos was a familiar soundtrack. At 32, Vivienne was a titan of private equity, a prodigy who had just finalized a ruthless, multi-billion-dollar leveraged buyout of Meridian Airways, a legacy carrier struggling to modernize its operations. She had spent the last 3 weeks locked in windowless boardrooms in London, dissecting balance sheets, firing incompetent executives, and restructuring the airline's crippling debt. Now, she just wanted to go home to New York. Vivienne was not a woman who needed to flaunt her wealth. After 80 hours of corporate warfare, she had traded her sharp, tailored power suits for comfort. She wore a simple, unbranded charcoal cashmere hoodie by Loro Piana, a pair of dark, relaxed-fit joggers, and well-worn white sneakers. Her hair was pulled back into a simple, messy bun. To the untrained eye, she looked like a tired college student flying home for the holidays. To anyone who understood stealth wealth, the subtle draping of her clothes and the vintage, scuffed Hermes Birkin, 40 serving as her carry-on, told a completely different story. She navigated the crowded terminal with practiced ease, heading straight for the Meridian Airways Pinnacle Lounge. As she approached the frosted glass doors, she pulled out her phone to display her digital boarding pass. Standing behind the marble reception desk was Brenda Higgins, a woman in her late 50s whose tightly hairsprayed uniform matched the rigid, severe expression on her face. Brenda took one look at Vivienne approaching and immediately stiffened. "Excuse me, miss," Brenda said, her voice dripping with practiced condescension. She held up a hand, palm facing outward, effectively blocking Vivienne from scanning her phone. "This lounge is strictly reserved for first-class passengers and Pinnacle Elite members. The standard waiting area is back out in the main concourse, past the duty-free shops." Vivienne blinked, taken aback but keeping her composure. She had experienced microaggressions before, but the blatant assumption still stung. "I am flying first class," Vivienne replied evenly. She held out her phone. "Here is my boarding pass." Brenda did not look at the phone. Instead, she looked Vivienne up and down, her eyes lingering on the hoodie and sneakers with undisguised disdain. "Miss, sometimes third-party booking sites will put a first-class label on premium economy seats. I assure you, you do not have access to this lounge. If you keep holding up the line, I will have to call security." "Scan the QR code," Vivienne said, her voice dropping an octave, carrying the icy authority that usually sent Wall Street bankers sweating. Brenda snatched a handheld scanner from the desk and aggressively zapped the screen of Vivienne's phone, clearly expecting a loud error beep. Instead, the machine chimed a pleasant, melodious trill. The screen on Brenda's monitor flashed bright green. Carmichael, Vivienne. Seat 1. A Flight 882 to Los Angeles. Pinnacle Elite. Brenda's jaw tightened. She stared at the screen, her mind clearly struggling to reconcile the data with the casually dressed black woman standing in front of her. "There must be a glitch in the system," Brenda muttered under her breath, tapping her keyboard violently. "Is there a problem?" A loud, booming voice interrupted. Vivienne turned slightly to see a tall, red-faced man in his late 50s wearing a bespoke navy suit. He carried a sleek Toomey briefcase and wore a heavy gold Rolex that he made sure was visible. This was William Davenport, a mid-level real estate developer who flew Meridian often enough to possess an inflated sense of his own importance. "No problem at all, Mr. Davenport," Brenda said, her demeanor instantly transforming from hostile to aggressively subservient. She practically beamed at him, just dealing with a confused passenger. William looked at Vivienne, his nose wrinkling as if he had smelled something foul. "Well, please deal with it quickly. Some of us actually pay a premium for a quiet, exclusive environment, Brenda. I don't pay $10,000 a ticket to share space with backpackers." Vivienne felt a flare of pure, white-hot anger in her chest, but she stamped it down. She was the owner of this airline now. This was a perfect, unfiltered opportunity to see exactly how Meridian Airways treated its customers when the executives weren't looking. She looked at William, offering him a perfectly empty smile. "I'm sure the lounge is big enough for both of us, Mr. Davenport." William scoffed, turning back to Brenda. "Are you going to let her in?" "The system accepted her boarding pass, sir," Brenda whispered apologetically, as if apologizing for a tragedy. "I have to let her through." "Unbelievable," William muttered, pushing past Vivienne to enter the lounge. Brenda finally handed Vivienne a paper printout of her ticket. "The lounge is down the hall. Please try to keep your voice down and do not disturb our VIP guests." Vivienne took the ticket, her silence speaking volumes. She walked into the luxurious lounge, found a quiet corner seat by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac, and pulled out a sleek tablet. She didn't open a book or a movie. Instead, she opened the internal employee database for Meridian Airways. She typed in, "Higgins, Brenda." "Let's see how deep this rot goes," Vivienne thought, taking a sip of sparkling water. The storm was brewing, and the staff of Meridian Airways had no idea they were already standing in the rain. An hour later, the boarding announcement for Flight 882 to Los Angeles echoed through the terminal. As a first-class passenger in seat 1A, Vivienne was in the very first boarding group. She gathered her Hermes duffel and strolled to gate 14. Brenda was working the gate. When she saw Vivienne approach the priority lane, her face pinched in annoyance, but she scanned the ticket without a word, though she conspicuously failed to offer the standard "welcome aboard" that she enthusiastically delivered to the white passengers boarding behind Vivienne. Vivienne walked down the jet bridge, the familiar smell of aviation fuel and sanitized cabin air washing over her. She stepped onto the Boeing 777-300ER, turning left into the exclusive first-class cabin. It was a beautiful space, featuring private pods with sliding doors. She found seat 1A at the bulkhead, stowed her duffel bag in the overhead compartment, and sank into the plush leather seat. She closed her eyes, exhausted, looking forward to 5 hours of uninterrupted sleep. "Excuse me." Vivienne opened her eyes. Standing in the aisle, blocking the flow of traffic, was William Davenport. He was glaring down at her, his face flushed with irritation. "Yes?" Vivienne asked calmly. "You're in my seat," William demanded, pointing a thick finger at her. Vivienne frowned, pulling up her boarding pass on her phone. "I'm in 1A, unless they've drastically changed the layout of this aircraft in the last 10 minutes. This is 1A. "I always sit in 1A, William snapped. "I requested 1A. I am a Pinnacle Elite Diamond member with this airline. They always give me the bulkhead." "I booked this ticket 3 weeks ago," Vivienne replied, her tone remaining completely neutral. "I suggest you check your boarding pass, Mr. Davenport." William patted his jacket pocket and pulled out his ticket. He glanced at it, and a brief flash of embarrassment crossed his face before hardening back into arrogant fury. "They put me in 3B. This is unacceptable." At that moment, the lead flight attendant rushed over. Her name tag read Samantha. She was young, heavily perfumed, and wore a tense, anxious smile. "Is there a problem here, Mr. Davenport?" she asked, immediately deferring to the man. "Yes, Samantha, there is," William boomed, making sure the rest of the first-class cabin was watching. "I am a Diamond member. I spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year with Meridian. I explicitly asked my assistant to book me in 1A, and I find out I've been bumped to row 3, and worse, I'm bumped for her." He waved a dismissive hand at Vivienne's hoodie. "Are you upgrading standby passengers into premium seats now? Is this a charity operation?" Samantha looked at Vivienne, her eyes filled with the same dismissive prejudice Brenda had shown in the lounge. She saw a young black woman in sweatpants and immediately made a calculation about who was more valuable to the airline. "I am so sorry, Mr. Davenport," Samantha cooed. "Let me see what I can do." She turned to Vivienne, her smile dropping into a thin, tight line. "Miss, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass." "I've already scanned it at the gate," Vivienne said, not moving. "I need to see it again. We seem to have a ticketing error." Vivienne calmly handed over her phone. Samantha looked at it, then tapped her own handheld device. She frowned. The device clearly showed Vivienne was booked in 1A, but Samantha was caught between corporate policy and the booming rage of a wealthy, entitled regular. "Miss Carmichael," Samantha said slowly, "it appears there was a glitch in our system. Seat 1A is actually reserved for Mr. Davenport. He requires the extra legroom." Vivienne almost laughed. "A glitch? Fascinating. And where exactly is the system telling you I should be sitting?" Samantha hesitated, shifting her weight. "Well, because the cabin is full, I would have to reassign you to our main cabin. I can get you a very nice aisle seat in economy, and we can process a partial refund for the inconvenience." The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Vivienne leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. The fatigue was gone, replaced by a razor-sharp focus. "Let me make sure I understand you, Samantha. You want me to vacate the first-class suite that I paid for, downgrade to economy, and give my seat to this man simply because he threw a temper tantrum and doesn't like my outfit?" William turned red. "Listen here, you little—" "No, you listen," Vivienne cut him off, her voice cracking through the cabin like a whip. She didn't yell, but the absolute command in her tone silenced him instantly. She turned back to the flight attendant. "Samantha, I am not moving. I have a valid ticket for 1A. If Mr. Davenport is unhappy with 3B, he is welcome to disembark and catch the next flight." Samantha's face hardened. She was not used to being defied, especially not by someone she deemed beneath her. "Miss, if you do not comply with crew instructions, you will be in violation of federal aviation regulations. I am asking you nicely to gather your belongings and move to economy." "And I am telling you, no." William scoffed loudly. "Get her off the plane. She's clearly unhinged. She's making me feel unsafe." "I'll get the gate supervisor," Samantha assured him, shooting Vivienne a venomous glare. "Do not move, Mr. Davenport. We will have this sorted out immediately." Samantha spun around and marched up the jet bridge. William stood in the aisle, crossing his arms and smirking down at Vivienne. "You people always think the rules don't apply to you. You're about to learn a very hard lesson about how the real world works." Vivienne didn't respond to him. She calmly pulled her phone out of her pocket, opened her encrypted messaging app, and sent a single text to the Global Vice President of Operations for Meridian Airways, a man named Mitchell Grant, whose office was located directly in the corporate tower connected to this very airport. Text: "Mitchell, Flight 882 out of JFK, Gate 14. Boarding immediately. Bring the corporate legal team. We have a massive compliance and discrimination failure in progress." She slipped the phone back into her pocket, leaned back into the luxurious leather of seat 1A, and waited for the axe to fall. 5 minutes later, the heavy footsteps of authority echoed down the jet bridge. Samantha returned, closely followed by Supervisor Thomas Reed. Thomas was a heavily built man with a tightly clipped mustache, an ill-fitting polyester suit, and an expression that screamed middle management tyrant. He was the kind of man who thrived on exerting whatever small amount of power his badge afforded him. Behind them hovered Brenda Higgins, who had abandoned her post at the gate just to witness the spectacle. Thomas marched straight to row 1, his chest puffed out. He completely ignored Vivienne at first, turning immediately to William Davenport to shake his hand. "Mr. Davenport, I am so sorry for the delay. Samantha briefed me on the situation. We'll have your seat cleared out in just a moment." "Thank you, Thomas," William said smugly. "It's absurd what you have to deal with these days. No respect for loyalty." Thomas finally turned his attention to Vivienne. He didn't ask for her ticket. He didn't ask for her side of the story. He simply pointed a thick finger at the exit. "Miss, you need to grab your bag and exit the aircraft immediately." Vivienne looked up at him, her expression an unreadable mask of calm. "On what grounds, exactly?" "You are causing a disturbance," Thomas barked loudly, ensuring the entire first-class cabin could hear him. "You are refusing to follow crew member instructions, and you are sitting in a seat that does not belong to you." "The seat belongs to me," Vivienne stated, tapping the screen of her phone to illuminate her digital boarding pass and holding it up. "Seat 1A. Paid in full. No discounts, no standby, no glitches." Thomas didn't even look at the screen. "Our internal system shows that seat belongs to Mr. Davenport." "Your internal system is lying, and so are you," Vivienne said flatly. "You are attempting to illegally bump a ticketed first-class passenger to appease a frequent flyer who threw a tantrum. Furthermore, you are doing so with clear racial and class-based bias. This is a violation of the Department of Transportation's Passenger Bill of Rights, and it is a violation of Meridian Airways' own corporate charter." Thomas's face turned a mottled, ugly shade of purple. He was not used to passengers knowing the rules, let alone citing them back to him with the cold precision of a corporate lawyer. "I don't care what you think you know," Thomas sneered, stepping closer, attempting to physically intimidate her by looming over the seat. "I am the highest-ranking official at this gate. What I say goes. You have two choices. You either walk off this plane right now, or I call Port Authority police to drag you off in handcuffs. Your choice." A collective gasp echoed from a few rows back. Several passengers had pulled out their cell phones and were actively recording the confrontation. Brenda chimed in from the aisle, her voice shrill and victorious. "Just get off the plane. You're holding up the departure. Stop being so entitled." Vivienne slowly unbuckled her seatbelt. She didn't stand up, but she shifted her posture, sitting up perfectly straight. The lazy, tired energy she had carried through the airport evaporated entirely. When she spoke next, her voice was deathly quiet, yet it carried an authority that made the hair on the back of Samantha's neck stand up. "Supervisor Reed," Vivienne said softly, "I am going to give you one chance, exactly one, to step back, apologize, and let this flight depart as scheduled. If you choose to call the police, you will be initiating a chain of events that will end not only with your termination, but with the termination of everyone standing in this aisle who is complicit in this farce." William Davenport laughed out loud. "Oh, she's threatening the staff now. Did you hear that? Call the cops, Thomas. She's a security threat." Thomas sneered, pulling a walkie-talkie from his belt. "You're done, lady." He pressed the button. "Dispatch, this is Gate 14. I need Port Authority officers on board Flight 882 immediately. We have an uncooperative, hostile passenger refusing to deplane." "Copy that. Gate 14. Officers are en route." Thomas smiled down at Vivienne, a nasty, triumphant grin. "They'll be here in 2 minutes. If I were you, I'd start packing your little bag." Vivienne sighed. It was a sigh of genuine disappointment. She had hoped, on some small level, that at least one employee would show a shred of integrity, that Samantha might question the fake glitch, or that Thomas might actually check the system. But the rot at Meridian Airways was deep, it was cultural, and it needed to be burned out from the root. She didn't reach for her bag. Instead, she crossed her legs and looked at her watch. 2 minutes, she murmured. Let's hope Mitchell drives fast. Less than 90 seconds later, heavy boots sounded on the jet bridge. 2 large Port Authority police officers stepped onto the plane, their hands resting on their utility belts. They looked tense, expecting a violent altercation based on the radio call. "What's the situation here?" the lead officer asked, looking between Thomas, William, and the seated Vivienne. "This passenger," Thomas said, pointing aggressively at Vivienne, "is trespassing. She is refusing a mandatory downgrade. She has threatened airline staff, and she is holding up a federally scheduled flight. I want her removed and charged with trespassing." The officer looked at Vivienne. He saw a calm, collected young woman who didn't look remotely hostile. "Ma'am," the officer said, his tone firm but professional. "The airline has the right to refuse service. If they ask you to leave, you have to leave. If you refuse, we will have to arrest you. Please stand up." William Davenport crossed his arms, practically vibrating with glee. Brenda Higgins had her phone out, seemingly texting her co-workers about the drama. Vivienne looked at the officer. "Officer, I am perfectly willing to step off this aircraft. But before you put your hands on me, I highly recommend you look out the window at the tarmac." The officer frowned, confused by the strange request. "Ma'am, I don't—" "Just look," Vivienne commanded. The officer leaned over row 2 and peered out the small oval window facing the terminal ramp. Down on the tarmac, bypassing all standard airport security protocols, a black SUV with flashing hazard lights had just sped across the concrete, screeching to a halt directly beneath the jet bridge of Gate 14. The door of the SUV flew open, and a man in a sharp grey suit practically sprinted up the external metal stairs toward the jet bridge door. "What is that?" William demanded, straining his neck to see. Before anyone could answer, the door to the jet bridge clanged open with a loud bang. Heavy, frantic footsteps echoed down the tunnel. A second later, Mitchell Grant, the Global Vice President of Operations for Meridian Airways, burst into the first-class cabin. He was panting, his tie was slightly askew, and he looked absolutely terrified. Behind him were 2 men in dark suits, carrying leather briefcases. Corporate legal counsel. Mitchell's wide eyes scanned the cabin, skipping over William, completely ignoring Thomas Reed and the police officers. His gaze landed on Vivienne, who was still sitting calmly in 1A. Mitchell went pale. He practically shoved Thomas out of the way to get to the front of the aisle. He didn't yell. He didn't posture. He stopped dead in front of seat 1A, swallowed hard, and slightly bowed his head. "Ms. Carmichael," Mitchell stammered, his voice trembling slightly. I am so profoundly sorry. I got here as fast as I could." The entire cabin went dead silent. Thomas Reed frowned, looking at the Vice President of Operations in confusion. "Mr. Grant, what are you doing here? We're just removing an unruly passenger." Mitchell spun around, his face suddenly turning a violent shade of red, a stark contrast to his earlier paleness. The fear vanished, replaced by a volcanic, terrifying rage directed entirely at the supervisor. "Shut your mouth, Reed," Mitchell roared, his voice echoing all the way to the back of the economy cabin. "Do not say another word. Do you have any idea what you have just done?" Thomas recoiled, his jaw dropping. "Sir, she wouldn't give up her seat." "Her seat!" Mitchell screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Vivienne. "She owns the seat. She owns this plane. She owns the gates, the jet bridge, and the goddamn payroll system that prints your checks. This is Vivienne Carmichael, the new CEO and majority shareholder of Meridian Airways." William Davenport let out a strange, strangled, choking sound. Brenda Higgins dropped her radio. It hit the floor with a loud plastic crack, but nobody moved to pick it up. Vivienne slowly stood up. The casual hoodie and sweatpants suddenly seemed to carry the weight of a royal mantle. She looked at Thomas, whose face had drained of all blood, turning the color of dirty snow. "I told you, Thomas," Vivienne said, her voice smooth, calm, and utterly devastating. "Your internal system is lying." The silence inside the Boeing 777-300ER was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. It was the kind of silence that usually preceded a bomb detonating. For several agonizing seconds, the only sound was the soft, rhythmic humming of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit and the distant wail of a police siren outside on the JFK tarmac. Thomas Reed looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the click. His mouth opened and closed several times, like a dying fish, but no sound came out. He looked at Mitchell Grant, then at the two stone-faced corporate lawyers flanking him, and finally back at Vivienne Carmichael. The casual Loro Piana hoodie and the scuffed vintage Hermes Birkin 40 suddenly looked less like the attire of a budget traveler and more like the armor of a woman so wealthy and powerful she no longer needed to prove it to anyone. There has to be a mistake," Thomas finally choked out, his voice barely a whisper. Sweat was visibly beading on his forehead, rolling down his temples and staining the collar of his polyester suit. The acquisition. The Wall Street Journal said the private equity buyout wasn't closing until the end of the fiscal quarter. That's next month. Vivienne remained standing, perfectly still, radiating a terrifying calm. "The public announcement is slated for next month, Thomas. The ink on the leveraged buyout with Carmichael Holdings and our partners at Blackstone dried 48 hours ago in London. I own 68% of this airline's voting shares, which means, as of this morning, I am your boss." She stepped out into the aisle, closing the distance between herself and the supervisor. "And my first order of business was to fly home on my own product to see exactly why Meridian Airways has been bleeding millions of dollars in customer retention over the last 3 years. Now I know exactly why." Mitchell Grant, a 30-year veteran of the aviation industry who had survived 4 different CEO transitions, was practically vibrating with anxiety. He turned to the 2 Port Authority police officers who were standing awkwardly in the aisle, their hands now completely removed from their utility belts. "Officers," Mitchell said, his voice tight but deferential, "I apologize profoundly for wasting your time. There is no security threat here. This is an internal, corporate disciplinary matter. The call to dispatch was made in error by a rogue employee. We handle it from here." The lead officer, assessing the power dynamic that had just aggressively flipped, nodded slowly. He looked at Thomas with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Understood, sir. Have a good flight, Miss Carmichael." The 2 officers tipped their hats and swiftly exited up the jet bridge, eager to escape the radioactive fallout zone. With the police gone, the true reckoning began. Vivienne turned her gaze to Samantha, the lead flight attendant. Samantha had backed up against the galley partition, her face drained of all color. The heavy perfume she wore suddenly seemed sour in the tense air. "Samantha," Vivienne said, her tone devoid of anger, but sharp as a scalpel. "You told me there was a system glitch. You told me the computer was actively reassigning me to the main cabin, and you offered me a partial refund to vacate my seat." I, Samantha stammered, tears springing to her eyes. "Miss Carmichael, I was just following Thomas's orders. He radioed down and told me to clear 1A for Mr. Davenport. I didn't want to do it, I swear." "Stop lying," Vivienne commanded softly. It wasn't a shout, but it echoed through the cabin with the force of a gavel strike. "I watched you look at my boarding pass. I watched you make a calculated assessment based on my race, my age, and my clothing. You didn't question Thomas's order because you agreed with it. You decided that the wealthy, older white man in a custom suit deserved the first-class suite more than the black woman in sweatpants. You didn't just follow an illegal order, you fabricated a story about a glitch to cover it up." Vivienne held out her hand to Mitchell. "Give me the iPad." Mitchell immediately unzipped his leather portfolio and handed over a company-issued tablet, already logged into the highest administrative tier of the Sabre booking system. Vivienne tapped the screen a few times, her eyes scanning the data. "Let's look at this glitch," Vivienne said, turning the screen around so Samantha, Thomas, and a highly uncomfortable William Davenport could see it. "Fascinating. The system logs show exactly what happened. 10 minutes ago, Brenda Higgins, the gate agent, manually accessed the seat map. She overrode the system lock on seat 1A, my seat, and attempted to force a downgrade ticket to print. The system blocked her because my ticket is a non-refundable, fully paid first-class fare, not an upgrade or an award ticket." She looked at the jet bridge door. Brenda Higgins was trying to quietly slip back up the tunnel, her rigid posture completely gone, replaced by the hunched scurry of a cornered rat. "Mr. Grant," Vivienne said without looking away from the tablet, "ensure Miss Higgins does not leave the gate area. If she attempts to flee, have airport security detain her for corporate theft. She just attempted to steal a $10,000 asset from a paying customer to give it away for free." "On it!" Mitchell barked, gesturing to one of the lawyers, who immediately marched up the jet bridge to intercept the fleeing gate agent. Vivienne turned back to Thomas. "You authorized this, Thomas. You allowed Brenda to attempt a manual system override, and when the system blocked you, you decided to use physical intimidation and law enforcement to steal my seat. You violated FAA regulations, DOT passenger rights, and Title Civil Rights statutes, all in the span of 12 minutes. Thomas was shaking visibly now. "Ms. Carmichael, please. I have a family. I've been with Meridian for 14 years. Mr. Davenport is a Diamond Elite member. We are trained to accommodate our high-value flyers. You are trained to provide excellent service, not to commit fraud." Vivienne cut him off, her voice dropping to a terrifying register. "Your tenure means nothing to me when it is weaponized against the very people who keep this airline afloat. You are a liability, Thomas. A massive, walking lawsuit waiting to happen. And I do not tolerate liabilities." She handed the tablet back to Mitchell. "Mitchell, as of this exact second, Thomas Reed, Brenda Higgins and Samantha are suspended without pay, pending a formal termination hearing on Monday morning. Confiscate their SIDA badges, their gate keys, and their company electronics. Escort them off airport property immediately. If they ever set foot in a Meridian Airways terminal again, have them arrested for trespassing." "Yes, ma'am," Mitchell said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. He had likely been dealing with middle management corruption like Thomas's for years, but lacked the ultimate authority to gut the department. Vivienne was doing it for him in front of a live audience. Thomas let out a sob, burying his face in his hands. Samantha openly wept, pulling her airline scarf off her neck as if it were suddenly choking her. They were broken, their careers destroyed in a matter of minutes, completely stripped of the arrogant power they had wielded just moments before. Mitchell signaled to the remaining corporate lawyer and a pair of ramp managers who had gathered at the door. Take their badges. Walk them to the employee parking lot. Now. The first-class passengers watched in stunned fascination as Thomas and Samantha were stripped of their credentials right there in the aisle and unceremoniously marched off the aircraft. The toxic hierarchy of Gate 14 had been completely annihilated. With the rogue employees gone, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted, but the tension remained thick. There was still one piece of trash left to take out. Vivienne slowly turned her attention to William Davenport. The real estate developer, who had been loudly demanding Vivienne's arrest mere minutes earlier, was now pressing himself as far back into the bulkhead wall as he could, trying to make his large frame invisible. His red face had faded to a sickly, pale grey. The smug, arrogant smirk had been completely wiped away, replaced by the stark terror of a man realizing he had just picked a fight with a god. "Well, Mr. Davenport," Vivienne said, taking a step toward him, "it seems your status wasn't quite enough to get me thrown in jail today." William swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his expensive silk tie. He tried to summon a smile, but it looked more like a grimace of pain. "Miss Carmichael, I had no idea who you were. Obviously, this has all been a terrible misunderstanding. The staff were completely out of line. I didn't ask them to remove you. I simply asked about my seat assignment." "Do not insult my intelligence," Vivienne replied, her eyes narrowing. "You stood right there and called me a backpacker. You demanded I be removed because I made you feel unsafe. You cheered when Thomas called the police. You are the exact reason those employees felt emboldened to act like monsters. You demand a level of subservience that requires them to abuse others." "I am a Pinnacle Elite Diamond member," William said, his voice trembling, attempting to fall back on the only shield he knew. "I fly with you every week. I bring hundreds of thousands of dollars to this company." Vivienne let out a short, dry laugh that sent chills down the spine of the passenger in 2A. She turned to Mitchell Grant. "Mitchell, pull up Mr. Davenport's corporate profile." Mitchell, operating with the terrifying efficiency of a man trying to prove his own worth to his new boss, tapped rapidly on the iPad. "Got it, Ms. Carmichael." "Read his flight history and fare classes for the last fiscal year," Vivienne ordered, crossing her arms over her chest. William's eyes went wide. "Now wait just a minute. My corporate accounts are confidential." "Not from the owner of the servers they sit on, they aren't," Vivienne snapped. "Read it, Mitchell." Mitchell cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "William Davenport. Account tied to Davenport and Sons Commercial Real Estate. He holds Pinnacle Elite Diamond status. However, the status was not earned through flight miles. It was gifted through a corporate promotional tie-in with a credit card company 3 years ago." A low murmur of amusement rippled through the first-class cabin. The passengers who had watched William flaunt his wealth in the lounge were thoroughly enjoying this dismantling. Mitchell continued, his voice growing more confident. "Furthermore, Mr. Davenport does not pay premium fares. He flies exclusively on deeply discounted Q-Class economy tickets purchased through a legacy corporate portal, and relies on his gifted diamond status to demand complimentary upgrades at the gate. In the last 12 months, his net spend with Meridian Airways is exactly $200. Vivienne looked at William, raising an eyebrow. $14,000. You told the flight attendant you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year with us. You told her you pay $10,000 a ticket. You are flying on a discounted economy fare, Mr. Davenport. You didn't even pay for a first-class ticket today, did you? William was sweating profusely now. The bespoke navy suit looked heavy and suffocating. The corporate travel agent handles the bookings, he stammered, his arrogance completely shattered. Let's dig deeper, Vivienne said, her voice dropping into a dangerous purr. Mitchell, check the CRM notes on his profile. Any incident reports? Mitchell tapped the screen, scrolling down. His eyebrows shot up. Yes, ma'am. 7 incident reports in the last 2 years. Multiple complaints from cabin crew regarding abusive language, snapping fingers at flight attendants, and on one occasion in Atlanta, throwing a hot towel at a junior agent because it wasn't damp enough. Vivienne nodded slowly. And why wasn't his status revoked after the first incident? The previous regional manager had a policy of extreme appeasement for elite status holders, regardless of behavior, Mitchell admitted, looking embarrassed. It was a known flaw in our operational protocol. Consider that protocol permanently revoked, Vivienne stated. She took a step closer to William, invading his personal space, forcing him to look down at her. Despite the height difference, she was the only Titan in the room. Here is how the real world works, William, Vivienne said, throwing his own patronizing words back at him. Your wealth is exaggerated, your status is artificial, and your behavior is a disease that I will not allow to infect my aircraft. You do not own this space. I do. William held up his hands defensively. Okay. You've made your point. I'll go sit in 3B. Just let the plane take off. I have a very important meeting in Los Angeles. You're not sitting in 3B, Vivienne said flatly. William blinked. What? But that's my assigned seat. Not anymore. Vivienne turned to Mitchell. Cancel his ticket, refund his discounted fare to his father's company card, and permanently revoke his Pinnacle Elite Diamond status. Add his name to the internal no-fly list. William Davenport is no longer welcome on any Meridian Airways flight, subsidiary carrier, or code-share partner, effective immediately. William gasped, the reality of the punishment hitting him like a physical blow. You can't do that! You can't ban me! How am I supposed to get to the West Coast? I fly Meridian exclusively. You'll have to find another airline willing to tolerate your abuse, Vivienne replied coldly. I suggest you check Delta or United, though I suspect they won't put up with you either. Mitchell, have security escort Mr. Davenport off my plane. The 2 corporate lawyers, who had been standing silently by the galley, stepped forward. Sir, grab your briefcase, one of them said, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. It's time to go. William looked around the cabin, desperately seeking an ally, but the other first-class passengers were either glaring at him with open disdain or actively recording his eviction on their phones. The man in 2A even offered a small, mocking wave. There was no sympathy for the bully who had just been brutally outmatched. Defeated, humiliated, and stripped of his precious status, William Davenport grabbed his Toomey briefcase with a shaking hand. He didn't look at Vivienne again as he trudged up the aisle, his heavy footsteps echoing the complete collapse of his ego. He walked out the jet bridge door, escorted by corporate legal, and disappeared into the terminal. The heavy cabin door was still open. Vivienne stood in the aisle, taking a slow, deep breath. The toxicity had been purged. The air already felt lighter. She turned to Mitchell Grant. The vice president of operations was standing at attention, looking at her with a mixture of awe and sheer terror. Mitchell, Vivienne said, her voice softening just a fraction, returning to the calm, professional tone of a CEO. "Yes, Ms. Carmichael." "Get a backup gate supervisor down here immediately to process the final paperwork. Promote one of the junior flight attendants from the main cabin to lead first class for this flight, and give them a retroactive bonus for the sudden shift in responsibility. Tell the captain we are cleared to close the doors as soon as the paperwork is signed." "Right away, ma'am." "And, Miss Carmichael?" Mitchell hesitated, choosing his next words carefully. "For what it's worth, I am deeply sorry for what happened to you today. It is a disgrace, and it is not the airline we want to be." Vivienne looked at him, recognizing the genuine sincerity in his eyes. "I know, Mitchell. That's why I bought it. Now let's get this plane in the air. I'm exhausted." Mitchell nodded sharply, turning on his heel to bark orders into his radio, sprinting up the jet bridge to secure the new crew. Vivienne turned back to her suite at 1A. She slipped her vintage Hermes bag under the ottoman, sat down in the wide, luxurious leather seat, and finally, for the first time in 3 weeks, let out a long, slow exhale. She reached up and pressed the button to close the sliding privacy doors of her suite. As the doors clicked shut, isolating her in a cocoon of quiet luxury, a faint smile played on her lips. Karma had indeed come to Gate 14, and it had flown first class. The heavy door of the Boeing 777-300ER finally swung shut, sealing the cabin in a pressurized hum of quiet luxury. Inside the first-class cabin, the toxic energy had been completely vacuumed out, replaced by a collective sigh of relief from the remaining passengers. From the galley, a young woman stepped out, smoothing down her navy blue uniform apron. Her name tag read Natalie. She was 24, a junior flight attendant who usually worked the grueling back-of-the-plane economy shifts. Her hands were shaking slightly as she approached seat 1A, carrying a silver tray with a crystal glass of sparkling water and a warm, lavender-scented towel. "Miss Carmichael?" Natalie asked, her voice soft and inherently respectful. "Mr. Grant promoted me to lead the premium cabin for this flight. I wanted to personally apologize for what you experienced and to welcome you aboard." Vivienne opened her eyes and smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had offered since stepping into Terminal 4. The warmth in her expression instantly put the young woman at ease. "Thank you, Natalie. Congratulations on the battlefield promotion," Vivienne said, taking the water. "You don't need to apologize for the actions of a management team that failed you. Just treat everyone on this aircraft with basic human dignity, and you and I will get along perfectly." "Absolutely, ma'am. Please let me know if you need anything at all." As Natalie moved gracefully through the cabin, offering impeccable service to the rest of the passengers, Vivienne finally reclined her seat into a fully flat bed. She pulled the plush duvet over her shoulders and fell into a deep, much-needed sleep. At 30,000 feet, cruising smoothly over the American Midwest, she was completely insulated from the chaos she had left behind at Gate 14. But down on the ground, the storm had just made landfall. While Vivienne slept, the passengers who had witnessed the confrontation in the cabin and the Pinnacle Lounge were busy. In the modern age, absolute power and pure arrogance are rarely kept secret. By the time Flight 882 was passing over Colorado, 3 different cell phone videos of the incident had been uploaded to X and TikTok. The internet is a ruthless, unforgiving judge, and the narrative was perfectly engineered for virality. A wealthy, entitled real estate developer and a corrupt airline supervisor teaming up to illegally eject a young black woman in sweatpants, only for the ultimate trap card to be played. The hashtag #Gate14. Karma began trending within an hour. Aviation blogs picked up the story, verifying the tail number and the flight manifest. By the time the aircraft began its initial descent into Los Angeles International Airport, the videos had amassed over 40 million combined views. Wall Street analysts were frantically messaging each other, piecing together the leaked footage with the rumored Blackstone-backed leveraged buyout of Meridian Airways. When the wheels of the heavy Boeing touched down on the LAX tarmac, Vivienne disabled airplane mode on her phone. It immediately froze, vibrating violently as hundreds of emails, texts, and missed calls flooded her screen. The top notification was a text from Mitchell Grant, sent 3 hours ago. The footage leaked. We are handling PR, but you are the #1 trending topic in the country. The buyout is no longer a secret. Vivienne locked her phone, picked up her vintage Hermes bag, and stepped off the plane into the bright California sun. The shadows were gone. It was time to clean house. By 9 a.m. on Monday, the executive boardroom at Meridian Airways corporate headquarters in downtown Los Angeles was dead silent. Vivienne sat at the head of the massive mahogany table, flanked by her legal team and a highly caffeinated Mitchell Grant. Across the table sat the remaining legacy board of directors, looking thoroughly terrified. The weekend had been a bloodbath of public relations and legal maneuvering, transforming the Gate 14 incident into a brutal, real-life lesson in karma. Vivienne didn't mince words. She slid a sleek folder across the table. "Gentlemen, let's review the fallout of Friday's compliance failure." Mitchell opened his tablet, connecting it to the massive screen at the end of the room. "First, the internal personnel," Mitchell began, his voice steady. "Thomas Reed, Brenda Higgins, and Samantha have been officially terminated for cause. Because they explicitly violated Federal Department of Transportation guidelines regarding passenger bumping and racial profiling, they have been denied their severance packages. Furthermore, the FAA has opened an inquiry into Thomas Reed's abuse of authority regarding Port Authority police dispatch. He has been blacklisted within the Sabre and Amadeus global distribution systems. He will never work in aviation management again." A murmur of nervous agreement rippled through the board. "And the passenger?" Vivienne asked softly. "Mr. Davenport?" Mitchell almost smiled. The internet handled Mr. Davenport. The screen flashed to a CNN financial news segment, followed by a barrage of screenshots from LinkedIn and the Wall Street Journal. William Davenport had spent his entire life bullying people who couldn't fight back, hiding behind his father's mid-tier commercial real estate firm, Davenport and Sons. But the viral videos had stripped away his anonymity. Online sleuths had identified him within minutes of the video going live. By Saturday morning, the Google reviews for Davenport and Sons had tanked to a 1.1-star rating, flooded with tens of thousands of comments detailing his horrific behavior. But the digital humiliation was only the beginning. The real damage was financial. Over the weekend, Davenport and Sons lost their 3 largest commercial leasing contracts, Mitchell reported, reading from the brief. Firms like CBRE and Cushman and Wakefield have strict morality and public image clauses in their vendor contracts. They severed ties immediately to avoid the PR fallout. William's father was forced to issue a public apology, and, as of Sunday evening, William has been forced to step down as executive vice president of his own family's company. William had wanted to protect his fragile ego and his unearned first-class seat. In the process, he had incinerated his reputation, his career, and his family's legacy. He was currently hiding in his Manhattan apartment, his face plastered across the internet as the ultimate symbol of entitled, racist arrogance. Vivienne leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. She felt no pity for any of them. They had built a culture of cruelty, and it had collapsed under its own weight the second it encountered a foundation it couldn't bully. "Let this be the new baseline," Vivienne announced to the silent boardroom, her voice ringing with absolute authority. Meridian Airways is no longer in the business of kissing the rings of toxic frequent flyers, nor will we tolerate employees who act as their enforcers. We are an airline, not a country club. If our staff cannot treat a passenger in a hoodie with the exact same respect as a man in a bespoke suit, they will be removed. Are we clear? "Crystal clear, Ms. Carmichael," the board murmured in unison. The jet bridge at Terminal 4 had been freezing, but the corporate fire Vivienne Carmichael ignited that day warmed the culture of Meridian Airways for decades to come. The incident at Gate 14 became a legendary case study in business schools across the country, a stark reminder that true power rarely needs to announce itself, and that prejudice is the most expensive liability a company can carry. William Davenport, Thomas Reed, and the complicit staff learned a devastating, real-life lesson about karma. When you build your status by stepping on others, it only takes one wrong step to lose everything. Vivienne didn't have to destroy their lives. She simply handed them the rope and let the consequences of their own actions pull the floor out from under them. In the end, stealth wealth and unbreakable dignity didn't just win the argument, they bought the entire airline.